Tonight we're here to discuss the Tuthill Creek Watershed Management Plan. This is the first meeting of 3 that the town will be hosting regarding the development of the Tuthill Creek Watershed Management Plan. Tonight's meeting, the purpose of the meeting is to introduce you to the project and to hear your concerns and ideas regarding the watershed. What are your concerns? What are your interests? We need to know from you what we should be focusing on excuse me, in developing the plan. The second meeting will be sometime in the near future, in which we'll ask you to come back and let us know. Are we going in the right direction? Is this what you feel is right for your community and for the watershed? And then the final meeting will be at the end, the public meeting, in which we will ask for your comments and input on the recommendations that are contained in the plan. So stay tuned for those meetings. We expect it to be about a 2-year process. I think most of you have seen the website. There's also a Facebook page. That's the best way to keep yourself up to date on meetings and information and things that are going on within the watershed. And we're also working on some interactive components to the watershed website, some surveys, uploading pictures, that kind of thing, to make it a little bit more engaging for the community. Development of the Tuthill Creek Watershed Management Plan is funded in part from a grant through New York State Department of State. The town has been very fortunate in receiving numerous grants over many years from the Department of State to do the work that we do in the town of Brookhaven on your behalf. So we're very appreciative of their support, and I'd like to thank them for that. Their representative is not here tonight. Development of the management plan is a joint effort between the town of Brookhaven and the village of Patchogue, and we also have support from our neighboring municipality, the town of Islip. The watershed, we don't have a map up just yet. Can you get it up? Although you can't see the lines on here, it is almost equally divided in 3 by the 3 municipalities, by the town of Islip, the town of Brookhaven, and the village of Patchogue. So anything that happens in this watershed impacts all 3 municipalities equally. All 3 municipalities have an equal vested interest in what goes on in this watershed. Joining us here tonight is Trustee Pilton, where I saw him here earlier, back there from the village of Patchogue. So I'd just like to welcome you and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
At this time, I'm just going to turn the meeting right over to Carrie O'Farrell. She's the consultant for the project with Nelson Pope and Voorhees. They will walk you through the development of the plan, what goes into a plan, what is a watershed, and then hopefully lead us through a very lively discussion on your concerns and comments for the watershed. Is he here? I'm so sorry. Councilman Foley? My apologies. I knew I was going to miss somebody.
Right in the front row.
My apologies, Councilman from the 5th District joining us here tonight, who is eager to hear your interests and concerns as well. My apologies. I knew I was going to do this. With that,
just before I start the PowerPoint, does anybody from the back want to take, there's a couple of seats in the front and then a few in the middle. Does anybody want to sit? Just please do. If you're, I don't want to tire you out.
it's a
We will try and
warm
move
room,
this.
it's a tight room. Please sit, relax. We're going to be here a while. Please come forward. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and giving up your time to come and hear about a watershed management plan that we're doing potentially in your area. If you got a card, that means you live in the watershed contributing area. You can go to the first slide, please. I work for Nelson Pope and Voorhees. We're assisting the town in the preparation of the plan. I have with me Lara Urbat and Pat Aiken in the back, wait Pat, who is doing some of the public outreach and working on the project, so you can speak to any of us, as well as Veronica with questions after the meeting or during the meeting, feel free. We will have an opportunity at the end for you to ask questions and then to get your input as well. So we're just going to give you a little bit of background on what a watershed management plan is and a little bit about the resources within it. The idea behind this is to develop a planning study that provides for ways to protect the watershed or the waterway and create land use controls and public outreach and different pieces of a watershed management plan, which we'll go through in a minute, to try and increase awareness of this creek and then the health of the waterway. As Veronica mentioned, it is funded by the Department of State with both the town of Brookhaven and the village of Patchogue is contributing, and the town of Islip as well. So what is a watershed? Some of you may be here wondering, what am I doing here? Basically, very quickly, the idea of a watershed is that as rain falls, it topographically, it will go to the lowest point, which typically is a creek or stream of some kind. And we draw a boundary around that area where if a drop of water falls, it will eventually make its way to the waterway. So this is our watershed boundary. Just to give you, I don't know if you can see too well in the back, but this is Sunrise Highway, Waverly, we're here. But we do have some maps later on that show the different jurisdictions, but the creek itself is very visible in the lower half, and then a little not very visible once you get north of Sunrise Highway, and even in this area it's a little tough. So it does have an upper reach north of Sunrise Highway. So what does a watershed management plan do, or what are we trying to accomplish? The idea is you start by characterizing what are the resources, what are we looking at from environmental resources, land uses, zoning, different elements will be characterized so we have a base of, to make recommendations and to think about how we can improve the area that drains to this waterway. We'll identify issues and opportunities. One of the things we want to do is understand what are the problems in the area and then what are the assets. We want to know what's important about this waterway, what you value about it to make sure that we're protecting that. We provide recommendations at the end. We gather all sorts of input. We talk to all the different municipal entities. We talk to stakeholders of all different kinds, and then we come up with recommendations. And the idea is this plan is a long-term plan. This is a 25, 50-year plan potentially. So there'll be recommendations that might be within the first couple of years that can be accomplished, and then others that will be identified for grant funding potentially for future action. And then we identify how we're going to get each of the recommendations done, what funding is available, those kind of things. So the components of a watershed management plan include natural resources and habitats, making sure that we're protecting those natural areas that exist within the watershed, and then are there opportunities to improve areas. Surface water impairments. We're going to look at the creek itself, and then how is it contributing to the overall health of Patchogue Bay. Land use, as I mentioned before, very important because that's where the pollutants are coming from in many of the cases. Stormwater management is very typically one of the key issues as part of the watershed because as it rains, all those pollutants are getting gathered and funneled to the creek. We look at municipal operations, things like salting of roads, drainage, clean out, and where is there stormwater drainage. Excuse me. And then policy and legislation. What laws are in place? Are there policies that could be improved? So we'll do that at the end. So what are the problems that sort of get you thinking on what is the situation that we're in? The creek itself there's very little water quality data for the creek itself. It's a fairly small body of water in comparison, but our biggest problem is Patchogue Bay. So this is a contributing area that's emptying into Patchogue Bay, and our problems in Patchogue Bay include that it's a pathogen impaired water body. It's closed to shellfishing because of those pathogens. And there's also, from a variety of data sources, issues with high coliform, chlorophyll A, nitrogen, and ammonia. So we'll talk about those in a little bit as well. The creek drains to Patchogue Bay, so whatever's collected within this contributing area makes its way into the creek and then down into Patchogue Bay. So the idea is to make an improvement within these contributing areas to make sure that what you're contributing to the creek, you're reducing those pollutants. Did you have a, and as I mentioned, there's not a lot of data for the creek. It's limited. Most of the data is at the end point. Just again, sort of just a point of awareness so that you're thinking about how do these pollutants get there? What are the sources of the different things that I mentioned? Pollutants that are carried in stormwater are things like fertilizer from lawn care, road salt, pet waste, also from waterfowl that and geese that are on lawns, and once the rain gets across that lawn, it's carried in the stormwater down to the creek. Poorly functioning sanitary systems is a key issue in a lot of places in Long Island. When you look at the data here, we have an indication of that. And then loss of buffers and habitat. So naturally, when you have buffers along a stream, they function to remove pollutants. And when you remove those buffers, you get less of that natural pollutant removal. So one of the things that we typically do in watershed management plans is look at the stream itself, immediate buffers, and see if there's ways to increase those buffer areas on public lands, and then within private lands, educate people that may live right along the creekside areas to what a buffer does and what are the benefits of those buffers. So the plan, as we kind of started to say, we're at the very beginning, we're in step one. We're doing inventory of the entire watershed area, looking at the different resources, classifying those different assets, and then public involvement, which is going to be throughout the entire process. This is the first meeting, and we will look for your input, whether at public meetings or through the website, email, phone calls. There's lots of ways that you can participate throughout the plan, and we'll keep you up to date on how we come up with recommendations through this process. We identify the management actions, and then we'll prepare the plan, and that will be out for public review once we have a draft put together. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the watershed itself because of sort of the characterization of resources, so you have an understanding of the watershed, and then we're going to ask for your input at that point. So there's going to be a variety of pictures that I'm going to run through that give you some general information about the watershed. This is providing topography where the high points up at the top are at about elevation 100, and then going down to the green areas, which is elevation 0. So you can see you've got a pretty, as you would expect, the watershed area is coming down to the creek and then down to Patchogue Bay. We break the watershed up into sub-watershed areas, which there's 13 of them. And those are basically ways to help us look at management and improvements and help sort of quantify where pollutants may be coming from and focus recommendations within areas. So you look at what are the immediate contributing areas to different parts of the stream. So those are the 13 sort of sub-areas that we'll focus our recommendations within. This is a very busy map, but this is soils. So there's lots of different soil types within the watershed area, but for the most part, it's fairly well drained. There is an area of this sort of light yellow color that's indicating fill areas. There's been a lot of, was a wetland area that's been filled, so it's been modified over time, particularly if you look next to the immediate creek areas in many cases. Groundwater. The watershed boundary itself is based on surface topography and what, from a rainfall aspect, will come down to the creek. Groundwater is another issue, and it does, I'll show you a slide in a minute that shows what the groundwater contributing area to this creek is. But we always look at groundwater and try and understand, are there pollutant sources that are coming into the creek via groundwater? So, again, there's limited groundwater quality information within the creek. These little blue dots are indicating well locations that have been used over time. Not many are active at this point, but generally it's showing not a significant issue with groundwater quality in this contributing area. Your depth to groundwater ranges from, this is elevation 5, if you see that right there, to very limited depth of groundwater down at the bottom of the creek, and then it increases as you get to that areas of higher topography. This is elevation 40, just to give you an example. And if you remember the topography, we're probably about elevation 80 up here, so there's about 40 feet from the ground surface to groundwater in this area, and then you might be down to 2 feet in the lower portions of the watershed. This map is very colorful and a little tie-dye looking, but it is based on a model that was done, and it shows groundwater contributing time to the creek itself. So our watershed boundary is, again, this black and white boundary. The red area indicates a 0 to 2 year travel time. So as rain hits the ground, infiltrates down into the subsurface to the groundwater table and travels then horizontally to the creek, how long will it take from the point that it goes to the subsurface and then travels? So again, from a pollutant standpoint, it's important to understand how quickly groundwater is traveling from the edge to the immediate surface water. As it travels underground until it gets to the groundwater table, usually pollutants can get removed. So it's usually a good thing to have depth from surface topography down to groundwater. So you kind of look at those immediate travel times, the areas where it's traveling very quickly to the creek, because that's a very quick flow path for pollutants. Wetland areas, this is a map that shows what you'd expect, the areas immediately surrounding the creek are where we have both tidal wetlands at the base and then freshwater wetlands as you extend up to the upper reaches of the creek. And then there's one separate freshwater wetland that is separated from the creek itself. Land use, one of the things that the plan will do is evaluate the different land uses and the intensity of those land uses, and also estimate pollutant loads based on land uses as well. So this map's also very colorful, but it's basically showing that the yellow areas are mostly the medium density residential. There's also a fair amount of high density residential, which is the orange within the area, and red is commercial. This is Gateway Plaza, which you're probably familiar with on either side of Sunrise Highway. Zoning is something that we look at, and that's something that's evaluated as part of the plan in terms of the appropriateness of the zoning immediately surrounding the creek. So there may be recommendations related to zoning as we go forward and look at the different recommendations for improvements. Publicly owned lands, this is a little tough to see, but there is a fair amount of publicly owned land, which are represented by these different colors based on different municipalities. So the village is purple, the green is Suffolk County, the town of Islip is the red, Brookhaven is orange, which is a little tough to see, there's one right there. So there are some components of publicly owned land immediately on this along this corridor. And another thing that we look at as part of recommendations are there parcels that would be important to add to acquisition lists if money becomes available? Is there a high priority to acquire certain parcels in the vicinity of the creek? So that's something that we'll look at. Stormwater infrastructure, because stormwater is a carrier of pollutants, stormwater is usually a very big focus in watershed management plans. And so we look at what is the existing infrastructure and how is it getting to the creek? Are there cases where you have drainage in streets that's being piped directly to a stream, making a direct pollutant source basically? Understanding, are there places where you're getting pickups, which there's different symbols here which are a little tough to see, but we do have the maps available for you to look at the end. But understanding where there's current drainage that just recharges and the recharge basins within the area, as well as where is there drainage that is directly discharging to the creek, and are there ways to improve that situation? So that brings us to the end of our initial overview of the watershed management plan and the steps. We'd like to get your input next, but just generally speaking, what we're going to do, as I said before, is we're going to draft the characterization section, which that'll be available on the website for you to look at to get a little bit more in-depth information on the watershed. If there's a particular area that you're concerned about, you can read further on that. We'll draft the recommendations. Again, once we get those put together, we'll have a public meeting and get input on those recommendations and get suggestions from the public. We'll have we'll have two more of these meetings, both at the initial recommendations and then at the end when we have the plan put together. And we'll issue the final plan. I think there's one more. Oh, just kidding. There is the websites which we will make available. We don't have Wi-Fi? We don't have Wi-Fi, right? Okay. Anybody that signed in today, we have your email address, so we can send out an email and give you the contact information for the website, so you can look at that at your convenience, and then we can alert you of upcoming public meetings and opportunities as well. So before we break into getting your input, does anybody have any specific questions?
Yeah. Who started this?
It was the town. You want to speak to it?
The town of Brookhaven initiated the process. Every major river or creek on the South Shore has a watershed management plan associated with it. So this is the last one. This kind of completes the package for us. So when you look at all of the contributing creeks to the South Shore estuary, there's a management plan for each one. This is the last one, so this is what you're talking about.
And again, one of the purposes for the watershed management plan is looking at recommendations in terms of zoning and land use, but also it identifies actual improvement projects so that when grant opportunities become available, we say, okay, we've got this great project that fits the description of what this grant may be, funding. So the idea is to identify projects that as we go forward, we can get some improvements done.
What exactly does 303D classification mean?
That is a listing that New York State prepares. Every 2 years they update it, and it's based on classifications of water bodies, and they get listed if there's a specific pollutant issue. And they look at that through water quality monitoring, and then a water body will become listed if it's not, for Patchogue Bay, for instance, shellfishing is one of the key uses for that waterway. And because of the issues of pollutants and pathogens in particular, they're not able to use that, open that water body for shellfishing. So the idea is, once it's listed, the contributing areas have additional requirements to try and focus and clean up that, the specific pollutant that it's listed for.
So 303D just means it has pathogens? in the water?
303D is a list, a statewide list. It lists water bodies for lots of different reasons.
Okay, so
this-
it's just a list.
Right.
It has no particular meaning.
Well, it does. Once a water body is on that list, there's basically a directive that, one, that it can't be used for whatever reason, it's impaired. That's what the name of the list is for, is water body impairment. And then the reason for why it's impaired, and then the idea being through other regulatory requirements, the municipalities are looking to try and address that pollutant source so that you can hopefully improve it.
Because on the list, it says it's mainly from road runoff. On the list, it says 303D, it says.
There's different reasons for it. So there's urban runoff is another reason for listing. Phosphorus could be.
Patchogue Bay is listed as.
Right,
you know,
so there's probably a couple different listings for it. Do you know?
I believe,
Urban storm runoff.
right, so that's what is contributing to the problems within the bay. There should be another column there that actually says what the impairment is,
It's,
and it should say pathogen.
it says pathogens.
Right, so what that's telling us is that the pathogen problem is coming from stormwater runoff,
Right,
which
right.
Carrie explained before. It's all that rainwater is collecting pollutants and pathogens when it hits the ground, carrying it to the creek and then discharging it to the bay. So that's why Patchogue Bay is on the list.
So then I assume that taking care of the storm runoff is one of the highest priorities.
It's one, but it's not the only source. So, I mean, the reasons for you could get into a very long discussion about that list and how it's put together. I think, DEC, the State Department of Environmental Conservation issues that list based on a limited data set. So I wouldn't limit it just to stormwater. We know that stormwater is a source, but it's not the only source. So we'll look at a variety of different sources that we should be addressing as part of the plan.
How about an oil spillage in the apartment complex I live in?
So that's actually something
Seeps
too
into
in
the
terms of
ground.
land uses. There's many other things that could come up in terms of,
it's really
if you look at some of the commercial uses immediately surrounding the creek, there are some pretty intense uses. Things like auto body repair where there may be discharges. There's some industrial uses.
Oil that was put into the ground in an apartment complex close to the bay, Bayview Garden Apartments.
Right, so if that
Supposed to
happens,
be 206, it was a mess. I
Right.
heard. They can't sell a property because of it.
then they probably have a requirement to clean it up. So when a spill like that happens,
Band-Aids over it,
well,
but.
when a spill like that happens, DEC is notified and they come up with a plan to address it, is typically what happens.
But wouldn't you want to, in addition to, characterizing nutrient loading and bacteria, also know about any particular hazardous or toxics
Yes,
along that? Okay.
that is part of it,
Right.
and that is, we usually will get a spill history. There's a database that is put together that identifies different spill locations, if they're opened or closed. We'll look at that as well, and where the properties are. It's, pretty specific information. It'll list over time, if there's been several incidences at properties, it'll show repeat incidences, so that's good to know too, in terms of the appropriateness of the land use and, if there's some additional work that that's needed.
And since there's no information about the water and the quality of it, you said there's very limited information about the water quality of the creek. Will you be testing the water?
We won't as part of this, but I think that's very commonly a recommendation, so that when you can get a protocol put together and funding put together to do regular monitoring, it is always helpful, because then you can.
Its whole purpose is
Yes,
knowing the quality of it,
Right.
that what's going into the bay.
People are
Right.
getting sick.
I'm sorry, you had your hand up very early on,
I
so.
have a question with regard to probably something you could answer. Then in Carmen's River, similar project to this, how long did that take from beginning to end?
4 or 5 years. Ford River, similar project, we just finished the Ford, and I also checked it out.
And then at the back end of this, when you have town-owned property, that you did, you put in a Loveland Park, right off South Country Road, is that something that would be considered to be done along the river?
It's always an option. Those are the kinds of recommendations that you should go into a management plan. Sometimes the recommendations can be very specific to actually specify which parcels would best benefit from something like that, or there might be just general recommendations that request or ask the town to look at, identify, and prioritize parcels for acquisition. And the town does have an open space committee that does that on a regular basis. So this helps that process.
Right, but this is the piece that I know you only referenced right on the end, where on the Patchogue side of the creek.
Right, so in a minute, we're gonna go to those kind of recommendations, so we're gonna ask you to think about and, basically bring up, if there's an area that you know is an issue or an opportunity exists, we're gonna document that now. We were gonna break up, but we're in such a tight room, I think we're gonna try and just keep everybody together and do this, rather than cause mayhem.
Would it be fair to characterize Tuthill's as saltwater, brackish, and fresh?
Yes.
What's the source of the fresh, what is the immediate source of the fresh water supply all the way on the north end?
Contributing area and groundwater.
So it's all groundwater fed, and so there's not...
Yeah, and I mean, just surface runoff to that area as well as.
There's,
If I flood, I flood right now. So all these toxins are coming into my basement now, my basement? It's
I
gonna
mean,
get worse?
it depends on what your situation is. You can't really say if you have a
I'm on
storm.
a branch of Tuthill's Creek.
Right.
Tuthill's Creek, when it rises, it comes into my basement. It's been this way for years and the village hasn't addressed it. So now, you're telling me that all this more is coming into my basement? All these toxins?
Two different things. You've got a surface, I don't know if your condition is a groundwater condition or a surface water condition. It sounds like the groundwater condition. So from what we know about the groundwater condition, there's not a lot of evidence of there being a specific groundwater issue within what we know, which isn't a ton, but within the contributing area here, the groundwater conditions were good. There weren't specific areas of concern within the wells that we have data on. Surface water is a different situation.
Question, all the runoff that has occurred over the years, now, like Tuthill's Creek, there's like 1 to 2 feet of silt built up. Now, if that is not taken care of, that's gonna keep coming into the bay. Are there any plans to remedy that situation?
That's a very good, that's an issue, so that's one thing we wanna, Pat, do you wanna come up actually and start writing? Just really quick, before we jump into that, is there anybody else with a general question, and then we're gonna go into issue, that kind of discussion?
I'm embarrassed, but I've never heard of Tuthill's Creek.
I know.
I've lived here my whole life, so something about Patchogue River?
No.
No, so the Patchogue River, can you,
The next one west.
Next one west.
in between Corey and Patchogue River.
So Westlake?
No, it's the next.
No,
it's the
Westlake.
next
So
one
Westlake-
west of.
Westlake is part of Patchogue.
Waffle Road.
This is Westlake,
Okay.
and it is the only impoundment on Tuthill's Creek. I have seen, let me correct myself, I have seen this referenced as Pine Lake, this little water body here.
Yep.
This is the only one with the major dam. And this would be Patchogue River, right over here.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and I just have one other question. These came, with the watershed programs that have been in effect now, how are they working? Are they doing okay?
We use them to get grant funding. So every watershed plan has a list of recommendations based on all these categories that we talked about. And that's basically, that's our Bible, that we then go to the funding agencies and get money, like from the Department of State, to do specific projects. So they're very helpful to the town when it comes to actually implementing actions in the plan. And there are numerous plans that have been adopted by the town over the years, and there are various states of implementation. But it is a tool that we look to on a regular basis, that most municipalities look to on a regular basis, to move forward and taking action in the communities.
But is the water clean in the places, or is it too early to tell?
It's too early to tell in some of the more recent ones. It's hard to gauge what's improving and what's not improving. The town doesn't take samples and keep that kind of data. That's something that the state does and the county does. So we don't do that generally. We do the improvements so that way the water can get cleaner, and then other agencies will document the status.
Some of the more long-living watershed management plans that have been done throughout Long Island, Hempstead Harbor is a great example of a case where 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, wow! Okay, so, for a very long time, that harbor was a mess, an absolute mess. And because of actions that have taken place over time through that watershed management plan, they've reopened areas to shellfishing. They've done all that has cleaned up dramatically over the last 25 years. So it does take time, and it takes a long time to get certain actions implemented. Changes in zoning, changes in land use, all those things kind of additively come together to make an improvement. So it does take time.
Another question. Is the Patchogue Village involved in this, or just the town?
Patchogue
So
Village is
wouldn't
part
this
of
be a great opportunity for the village to address the flooding that occurs at the bottom of Wilson Avenue? All those houses and basements that flood. Do you work with the village to incorporate fixing this problem? It would be a good time to fix it, right?
I can't speak on behalf of the village. Trustee was here. I think he stepped out. So I can't speak on behalf of the village, but the town does work with the village in a lot of different programs. That is something that the village would have to do. We don't have jurisdiction in that area. That's not something the town has jurisdiction in.
But the idea behind a watershed management plan, if it's a watershed-related issue, then it's something that you can write in terms of recommendations, if it's something that can be addressed through a watershed management plan. If what's happening there is relating or causing pollutants to enter the water body, and there's a fix, then that's something that comes into the plan. You had your hand up before, great, and somebody in the back.
So in your study, you're going to be trying to identify areas with different sources of problems without doing testing?
That's the hard part about it. There is, again, the idea being there's limited water quality information currently. However, one of the recommendations and a way to get it funded, once you have a recommendation in place, when a grant application comes in and there's a management plan behind it that's adopted, it kind of elevates from a grant funding standpoint, it elevates the likelihood of your project getting funded. So if we can put together a list of recommendations which include regular water quality monitoring at certain stations and get that funded, then you could get a longer term data set.
So basically, there's not enough money.
Right, it's expensive to do water quality testing. Right.
So that there's going to be not much money to do a lot of other things.
Well, improvement project, I mean, there isn't a management plan here, so there hasn't been a lot of grant, I don't want to speak for the town, but I don't think there's been a lot of grant funding focused in this area. So the idea is once you have a management plan in place, you can funnel, make improvements, specific improvements based on the recommendations in the plan. So it's like a step-by-step process, yes.
So when I retire, I'm in Florida.
Hopefully not, you're gonna stay, you're gonna keep your house and then.
Would these improvements just be more than just preventative, or something actually help out the creek the way it is right now? Because the damage is basically done.
Right.
I live down at the end of River Avenue, and the creek's in my backyard, the river's across the street from me. But a couple of years ago, when they did the dredging in the Patchogue River, they did, in my opinion, a phenomenal job. Everything they dragged out of the river wound up directly out my window, but I didn't smell it, it didn't make a scene, and they got rid of it. Do you foresee anything like that, a kind of operation like that happening on Tuthill Creek?
Well, one of the comments that was just made is an issue of sediment. So if we identify sediment as being an issue, and then, again, it takes a step-by-step process to get there, but if we identify sediment as being a problem and impairment, especially if that sediment is contaminated, which often happens within creeks and streams, That becomes a recommendation if they can get it funded. You know, you go through the process of having it tested, getting the applications and permits put together, and then the project being completed. So that's.
But there is a possibility that it could be done to take it out instead of just preventative.
Right,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's the water quality, it's the actual water running through it as well as the sediment itself. So you gotta look at, there's a lot of different dimensions to it, that's one.
Okay.
In the phase of the project, would that dredging take place early on?
I would guess that to be a longer term project because the dredging is expensive. It takes quite a bit of effort to, one, actually do the dredging and then have it placed appropriately, make sure that it's tested, et cetera.
Again, in an apartment complex that says they have nothing to do with the water that overlooks the complex. But yet, I go out to feed the grease-covered swans, and pick up at least, I mean, it's two maintenance guys, pick up at least in one good 50 to 60 beer bottles, cans. I pull it out, and it's the dirt and the smell that comes out of the soil and the dirt there, but it's not their job. It has nothing to do with Home Properties Corporation. It belongs to the judges, from what I heard. I don't know who this judge is.
There is,
Yes.
there is a parcel.
But, I mean, that's just
actually.
on one day, because they allow other people from anywhere else to come in, because it's not considered private property. They're the only ones on River Avenue that let everybody in, and the kids to drink and throw the bottles and anything they want in there. So not only do you have to worry about the tenants that live there, which aren't that bad.
Is that
it's the
happening, that
Bayview Garden Apartment Complex.
that's this one, right? Is that there? It's probably hard to tell,
I
sorry.
don't know.
It's
green
just to
here,
the
it's
immediate
there.
south of that open space parcel.
It's so, well, the swans, I guess that's why they made a new place. You made a new place for the swans, so they won't be covered in grease. Is that what that pretty place is, down by Swan Bakery is gonna be? The swans have grease slicks around them.
Oh,
Yeah, and there's foam coming from the water at times. It's so sick.
Oh.
Baby garden is, I don't know what you call it, bay, the bay, right? It's not really a bay, it's a creek.
Okay, so that's floatables and
I'm down
other,
the block from,
I guess, contaminants potentially,
it's a creek, right?
in the creek.
We have so much.
Oh, no, that's where they
in
put,
Pine
yeah,
Lake.
yeah, that's
Now,
where
I
they put
call
the
it
swans,
Pine
so
Lake,
they-
is that what you call it, above Westlake?
so we
There's
don't
much
see the grease.
stuff
So-
in there that the ducks can walk across it. I'm
So I
not
go
kidding,
with the
in certain
tartness,
parts, I
like
mean,
a
there's
wine's
like
on.
little pathways that they can walk. They can kind of
They
swim
get
around
empty.
there too, but certain times.
Is it debris or is it
It's,
sediment?
yeah, sediment
And debris
got
And it smells.
seaweed, what do you call it?
And they took the, she said they took the boards out of the lake. She thinks they took the boards
Well,
out.
they did, a couple years ago, they
Of
were
the
up and
lake.
down, and like
The
right
people,
during
you
nesting
can take them
time.
out and put them in.
There was a flood control structure there? Is that what you're?
Yeah.
People just do it themselves though. I mean, they used to do that, they used to do it in Westlake also, but they,
So the ducks will
they've
just
changed
nest
it.
and then all of a sudden, the
Investigate
water
flood
goes up
control,
a foot.
maintenance.
Who's doing that?
Just in an effort of getting everybody in and out of here, I'd like to, if we can, switch over to, so it's kind of happening right now, but identifying things that are of concern, issues, areas where you have identified, as several people in the audience have, where you've identified a potential water quality problem or a land use concern that could potentially be a pollutant source. Are there places where you're seeing stormwater inputs, things like floatables and trash? Is there a place that constantly gets,
Oil slicks,
misused?
So you want that right now?
foam.
Well, go ahead, Ed, do you want to start?
Yeah, I was related to that before you went into the floatables and such. There are several parcels within the watershed, we've talked about some of them, that, number one, you have misidentified some of the land use as like low-density residential, which, for example, on Fairway Manor, which is deeded open space there, that recreational service district, on your use maps is identified in yellow as a low-density residential. It's deeded 0.
Right.
There's an effort right now by the owner of that property to make it very intensely residential. So certainly we'd like to see within this plan a mention of the deeded obligations 20+ years on that property to hold out the development and press for it to stay open. I've just learned this evening that he's moving forward on some effort on the Fairway Manor on the Brookhaven side. I don't know if you notices without me. So he's moving forward on something to modify comments from 20 years ago on the Brookhaven side. And a lot of that is ostensibly as sterilized as the Islip side with covenants to protect it, but apparently he's moving to modify those.
So you're referring to cases where it was deeded open space or areas that were covenanted as to remain natural when the property was developed?
All the
And
above.
there's a concern that there's pressure for that to become developed area?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I think if I'm,
Just
to relay that in
for
the
20
forward.
years, repeated attempts to open them back up and put many, many more units in there. But connected to that, there's other parcels that are vacant right now that are very close to the property. So again, I don't know if there are grants available for granting some of those, for, inclusion in the watershed, inclusion in other things to do with other recreational opportunities. So certainly we can work on identifying some of those. With regards to your issues about floatables and other trash and mess, I know, Pat, you and I went up and looked at some of the homeless encampments that are dotted in quite a bit of the more wooded areas, especially up by Gateway Plaza, that area behind the shopping center there. Yeah, exactly. And there's a half a dozen homeless encampments in there, plus a kitty cat city.
They set up tent.
Yeah, I mean, so again, certainly that kind of stuff, I mean, there are obviously no sanitary facilities, so when you're talking about stuff that's washing in the river, they're camping out in cesspits 20 feet off the river. 10 years ago, that was pretty in there, but they got chased out of other areas and focused on that heavy. No, that's right there, Gateway Plaza.
This is, jurisdictional boundary, this is the Islip Brookhaven boundary right there, and the green down here is Village of Patchogue.
Yeah, the same folks, if they get chased out of there, they go up to the Islip parcels. They used to go down to the movie theater parcel, and now excluded out of there. I mean, again, they're human beings and need help, but they don't need to poop in our river.
But a lot of them say they rather live like that.
Oh, that's nice, but they
There
don't-
was somebody, said.
But they don't have to.
It's terrible, yeah.
Again, the United Artists movie theater property is shortly, well, the town's already closed on the
Unless
open
it's
space there.
it's terrible.
And we're gonna have to go in there as a community and shovel out the mess for our park. And that's what's happening back in there as well.
Other
Excuse me,
areas of
he's
concern?
very knowledgeable, you should identify yourself to us, actually.
Now, Ed Silsby, with the little ad hoc group, the Tuttle's Creek Alliance. So again, we've been active on the movie theater stuff and several other
I'm
projects.
cleaning up.
Thank you.
A recreational trail project that we're proposing through there as well. But again, get the good people in those areas, and the bad folks don't want to be seen there leave.
Other areas of concern that you've seen in terms of food sources that we should look
I
at?
think that one thing that's overlooked is traffic and, how they, like, all the other places, gets so much traffic.
Further south?
Is in need of repair, but when it rains, and I won't go into it, but I won't, it just drains right into the lake.
If you don't mind, that's a great thing, and we'll have maps at the end. If there's areas, I would love anybody that has an identified area like that, if we can circle them on a map, that's great help, because we're gonna go through and, walk through different areas of the watershed and see if there's opportunities for stormwater improvement. So if you know
Park
there's.
Avenue goes from Islip to the town of Brookhaven and then the village, so
Okay.
it's, it's like, everybody goes like this.
Right. Well, somebody has jurisdiction on that road, so we'll figure out that's.
So dredging
That's
is
part
not-
of that's part of the end game here. We say, okay.
Or we work together.
Who's
We do that
responsible?
all.
Right. And actually, again, to the grant funding, if you have cooperation from multiple municipalities, that also helps to sort of elevate your application, so.
Dredging will never happen, is that what you were saying? Or the dredging part? To get water flow, the dredging will never happen because it's expensive, you were saying?
No, I didn't say that at all. I think that, dredging, again, you have to be careful for the reason behind dredging. In terms of water flow, there's a natural stream here. So, the need for sediment removal is one thing, but dredging to create, a stream that didn't exist previously is not likely something that would ever happen. But if you're talking about restoring a creek for the purpose, removing sediment for that purpose, that's something that is a great project.
We have a couple of pretty big roads that contribute to the.
Right.
I'm sure directly drain into the river.
Right.
So then talk of dealing with the highway departments.
Yep, definitely. DOT, the county, there's, each of the towns, the village, there's lots of different jurisdictions. And that's something that, again, if you identify a project and we can get it corrected, and it doesn't always have to be grant funded. The highway department has budgets for improvements, DOT has, obligations as well. There's a regulatory requirement, for municipalities to address pathogens in this area. So, there's gonna be the need to, over time, get projects in place to try and address stormwater.
Is there also thought of sewer for the sewer districts?
That's something that can be talked about. The sewer district's a big project, and there's been,
Isn't there a grant from the federal government to restore stuff, because all the corruption that happened back in the eighties like that?
Well, I
He was
know-
talking, and you don't see any new project.
there is,
It's great, there's all this money,
well, the county did identify specific areas very recently, for expansion of existing sewer districts and creation of sewer districts. I think the village of Patchogue was one of those expansion areas. So that is something that is very, very realistic, especially when you have high-density areas immediately next to water bodies. That's it's a legitimate concern, particularly if you're seeing, pollutants that are evidenced from sanitary systems. So that is something, that's like a very long-term project, but it's a
but it
possibility.
is something you said you did see in the Apple Patchogue Bay, in your presentation.
Patchogue Bay is closed for pathogens, so the different sources, again, depending on what water quality data is showing within the creek itself, you probably want to know exactly what's in the creek. The groundwater data was good. There's some
The groundwater
a little bit,
dam does not
a little
test
bit.
for pollutants.
Well, some of the pollutants will get down. If you have a sanitary,
Those soil borne that you showed with groundwater.
those are wells.
Those are just, well, they're test contaminant.
Yeah, that's the purpose of the wells, amongst other things, to understand what our groundwater levels, and then they also do sampling within those wells to understand if there's
So you said they
contaminants.
weren't active.
There's a variety. Those wells, they have sampled them over time, and there's not a lot of active wells. Within the last 20 years, there's limited groundwater data. Right. There was
In that area, is the stormwater outfalls mapped?
yeah,
So you know the location of them?
yeah.
And is there current green infrastructure projects or catch basin inserts that you know of in this watershed?
So that's
And
something-
will they be part of the plan, will you document them in the plan?
The locations are documented already, so they're available right now on the maps. We have actually, the town of Brookhaven has a partner project with Patchogue Village, in which we have a number of basins adjacent to the village that have filters in them. So any basin that has a direct discharge pipe to a surface water body has a filter in it already. And Patchogue Village also has their own rather extensive program.
You said there was 8 of them directly into it, they all have filters.
I can't say all of them do, a lot.
They may not all be municipal related, so some of these discharges are coming not from roadways necessarily.
One other question, is this specific to Patchogue Bay or the adjoining bays have a problem as well?
There's different, we're focusing on the immediate discharge location of Patchogue Bay. There are other issues as you go out to the Great South Bay, but the immediate Patchogue Bay is where we're focused.
Those filters aren't for contaminants.
They filter out sediment, gas, oil, so the stuff that you find.
And bacteria.
That's what it is.
Will this project help alleviate the overflow recharge basin? Will they, the recharge basin? So it's prevent flooding in blocks?
If you have, when you say recharge, do you mean catch basins? Or recharge?
Yeah.
Recharge, okay. So if there's an issue of a flooding
There's
issue,
standing water all the time whenever we have rains or anything. Will this project help alleviate that?
if, again, our focus is if that ponding or flooding is then trickling into the adjacent water body and causing, if there is a contaminant going towards the waterway, that's what we're concerned about. So if you want to identify an area on a map, then that's worth, investigating to see what the situation is there.
To hobby horse on that, again, speaking of, the parcel in kind of the middle there, the big teardrop shape. I mean, we've had success at, the green, the old movie.
Oh, this?
Yeah, that. Again, what the town has closed on up there will shortly become ours, or we come up and take a walk soon. We were able to pull out of the 65 acres that's in the center of that, about 30, and the lower level where you have a couple of those remnant wetlands is a relic and a piece of the Tuttle's Creek, and where what the lady's talking about having the flooding issues is basically a blocked off section. I mean, again.
In between here?
Correct. I mean, there's piping coming up from West Lake that basically follows the old stream course that ran up that way. And certainly, we're looking at, we've been able to lock up 30 acres, and we've got another 25, 30 acres available that can be locked up. And we're putting all that fresh water within the watershed. Right now, it's damming up. It takes several days to flood through people's basements to get to West Lake, because it's missing a couple hundred feet of pipe. So again, just looking at the ability we're dealing with the storm flows coming off of other sources that are going to be polluting. We've managed to save 30, maybe 60 acres of clean stuff. Let's plug that in.
Right. So that was the area that you were talking about before, what you're experiencing?
Yeah, they're right in that same area. Yeah, you can look at the maps from the 50s, the aerial surveys, and see the stream that's there over
Right,
the water.
old soil maps have, remnant stream connections. It's, again, Long Island, it's common in a lot of different places as they build major roadways, the railroad, they just cut through and elevated areas to bring the road through, cutting between two areas of stream. So it's, not uncommon to have something like that happen. So that's a good, again, issue to identify. Any other major issues? Because I'd like to go to the opportunities portion of this. So if there's things, which I kind of just mentioned right now, some of the opportunity part of this, things like areas for better open space. Let me back up, sorry. We want you to think about what are the assets of the creek itself, what are the things that you value that we want to make sure remain. Things like, views along different corridors, existing open space areas, the ability if somebody's fishing or kayaking within the creek, the ability to have access and do those types of things. Those are all examples of opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So if there's things that you have, ideas on, let us know. We want to be able to make sure that we're meeting the community's needs.
What was that nature walk that was going to go, or the hiking trail that was going to go up? That was kind of cool. Never happened. Sounded really
Well,
good.
we're hoping to get a revitalization of that plan. Unfortunately, it doesn't include most of the Tuttle's Creek, but a lot of the northern portion of the Tuttle's Creek watershed above Sunrise and the property around the movie theater could actually have a couple of miles of walking and mountain biking trails in there. North of Sunrise Highway, all that purplish stuff is town of Iceland parkland set aside for recreational walking and bicycling trails. There are trails in a lot of that, and that's embodied in a proposal that we're working on called the Greenway Trails. And so again, that involves a couple of private, for one privately owned parcel that could be used as what's called a trailhead, a place to park on County Road 19. Adjacent to the assisted living facility. Most of it's open water and wetlands right now. Couldn't be built anyhow, but there's room for a good parking lot. So it's things like that we've been working on to try to get some recreational uses. And again, to chase out some of the bad people who do bad things in there. And again, there are folks up there in Holbrook and by us in Blue Point and Patchogue that are vexed by the ATV riders and such. And again, when folks are, when you or I are up there walking the dog and we see little Johnny from next door sporting around on the ATV, we let mom and dad go. So they go elsewhere.
I know they do a lot of fishing in West Lake over there. I know the DC drops trout.
Right. We did, that's one of the, in terms of other people that are part of this process, DEC is one of them. We reached out to them. Troy Guthrie is in his area, talking about particularly electric fishing this area. way, then we want to continue that use and make sure that we'll have that opportunity. I don't have the answer to this question. Sorry.
Because in Canaan Lake, you're not allowed to fish because the, well, it's something with fish or whatever. I don't think they'd let you fish.
They do. For the same reason, like, the reason that like shellfishing is not allowed in Patchogue Bay is because they keep very tight control over that and monitor very closely on shellfish.
If we're over fishing,
Right.
500 yards down the block, they're saying it's contaminated.
Well, again, you got to think about differences in species and how they function. You know, it's shellfish or filters. So
But there is a strict, there's a strict limit on what you can eat that you catch there. So if you're fishing there and you're catching fish, you should check the DEC website because there's a very strict limit on what you should be eating on a weekly or yearly basis.
Is that by street? It's not by street. It's in the area.
I just see
By
DEC.
By species.
Right.
And certain fish.
You would just assume that DEC's putting fish in there, that they would sort of say that there's some sort of quality.
Well, those particular species are usually good, but don't forget, they put them in there and they might be good, but then those fish could be picking up contaminants as they're living throughout their lifespan in that water body.
For people going down there and fishing and eating it, probably. I don't know, I'm not, but I just see it happen.
Just very quickly, ladies and gentlemen, it's called put and take. Very few of those fish hold over to the next year.
Yeah.
I want to make clear. So what happens, called put and take, they put them in, you take them out, very few hold over until the next year anyway. Someone said mercury, you're talking about large game fish. And just one more thing, you might be confusing PCBs with mercury. I just wanted to toss that out. All right?
What are the protocols, if any, in the future? I don't know how, hypothetically, how aggressive, if they were to dredge or anything like that, to protect the habitats. There's a lot of great wildlife back there. There's fox and deer and, you know, what's the protocol for that?
There isn't a specific protocol beyond, again, the acknowledgement that retaining open space areas or identifying and preserving open space areas are important to the watershed. So if there's parcels that opportunities come into place, you know, the town has an open space acquisition list, so we want to make sure that we identify parcels that make sense along this waterway so that we can add those to that list. So if they do come for sale, there might be an option for the town to purchase them if the funds are available. Definitely identifying those parcels that are available right next, in very close proximity to the creek is usually a good idea. You want to try and keep those, those buffers or restore the areas immediately next to the creek, just in general.
I would like to, I mean, habitat establishment, these things have alewife in Westlake. Alewife ladder would be wonderful.
I don't think they've observed the species there in a while.
I observed it probably last time I was 7 or 8.
Oh, yeah.
Last time I saw them.
Yeah.
5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
Sorry, one more question.
No, that's okay.
The judge.
Apologize.
Can I have his number?
That's
Can I have his phone number? Who's responsible for the actual going out, or the planking, going out to the creek where I live? It's not the corporation where I live. I mean, it's falling apart. It's ready to fall in.
Are you talking about immediately next to the shoreline, like a
Yeah, the
walkway?
pier that looks out into the beautiful, it's absolutely gorgeous. You know.
Is it at the very end?
It's on River Avenue again, right
At the
after
very,
the
very-
tracks. No. Right after, over the tracks, River Avenue, there's an apartment complex.
Oh.
Bayview Garden on the right.
Here, this?
And it has 2 plankings going out into the apartment.
I know where
Is
it
it this
is. It's like a
apartment?
U-shape.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You could-
I know, it's falling down now?
It's falling apart, it's falling.
It's
And,
Patchogue River.
you know, I mean, they only fix the wood that's,
No,
that
Right up.
right by the parking lot.
right.
But the actual pier is falling in. I mean,
Likely the owner of the property.
is that the judge again?
No.
I don't think so.
That
That's
was
what you're saying, but.
They said it's not there.
Well, they're always gonna point fingers.
Yeah.
The Patchogue can tell you who owns the bottomlands there. In this area, a lot of bottomlands are owned privately. They're not public as they are in other areas. They're either owned public, they're either owned privately or by the village.
If it's the area we think, it's not indicated as a publicly owned area, so. Other ideas, areas of improvement? Yeah, that's a great, that's, part of what Ed was describing before, the ability, to create a path along and actually see the river, which not everybody sees. So that's something that we definitely want to identify opportunities for and mention areas to the north. We try to make sure that land is available for people. It's obviously there's a lot of private property immediately surrounding the creek, so you identify and try and focus within areas that are currently public.
In between Westlake and between Montauk Highway and the train tracks, we used to be able to, when we were kids, we used to go back there, build forts and fish and catch turtles. Now, if you go on the other side of the dam, you can barely even walk through there. It's just so overgrown. So overgrown. And when I was a kid, we used to see the little baby eels there.
That's a habitat. That's county owned, it's a piece of, that we, right there. There's a tower there, so the purpose of, there's likely, I think that's the tower, so we should look into, how that is held, it's county owned, for what purpose. Somebody in the back?
So I just wanted to say, I kayaked there a long time ago, and it was the first time I had ever seen kingfish in Patchogue. It's just not something you'd see. So there's really beautiful waterfowl and bird.
The ability to have access for like a non-motorized boat launch or something like that is something that may be of interest to people as well. So, the bottom part of the creek at least looks like it would be very conducive to kayaking and, or just a means to get out also to the bay. So that's something that we could look into. Anybody else? We definitely would like those of you that have specific areas that you would like identified. We're going to roll out the maps over here with markers. If you could just identify, circle it, let us know. We can either do it with Post-its or if you want to write right on the maps. If there's an area that you have a concern, and we'll try and track that down. And again, you can reach us either through the website. You can leave a comment or link it to the Facebook page. You can send us comments. Veronica and I are available. There's a card back there if you want to send an email. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you coming. So much beautiful wildlife.